Before we come to your calls, delighted to say Jack Monroe joins me now, food writer and campaigner. Jack, you've done, good morning to you, great to have you on the show. You've done so much already to help people with living costs. How concerned are you about the current situation, and do you think things are going to get worse before they get better? Good morning to you.
Good morning. I think, well, as for how concerned I am, I hear daily, almost hourly, from people who are absolutely petrified that they are not going to survive this crisis. That's how concerned I am. And although I'm the one that gets the platform and gets to go on the radio shows and gets to talk about this stuff, the reality is people out there on the ground are terrified that they're literally not going to live through the winter. Disabled people who have life-saving equipment that they need electricity to run to keep them alive. You know, things like dialysis machines. All sorts of different bits of equipment. If people cannot afford to turn their plugs on, to turn those pieces of equipment on, the reality is that they will die. And that's a lot of what I'm hearing at the moment. But that's sort of an extreme end of the scale. But most people are incredibly nervous and frightened about what's happening, what's already happened, really, but what's happening and what's yet to come. And I'm seeing absolutely no solutions from either of the potential future prime ministers. And I think that Boris Johnson saying that he's not going to do anything because it's his last few days in office or whatever is disgusting, actually. I mean, if he's not going to do his job, why are we still continuing to pay his salary? Like, just pop him on gardening leave and let somebody else stand in for a bit who's actually going to make a decision.
Do you think the political class as a whole, Jack, have just simply failed to grasp the urgency of this crisis? There's lots of talk about we have to wait and see, we'll leave it to the autumn. Labour's taken quite a while to come up with a policy too. Am I wrong, or is there just a sense of a lack of urgency is the word, really?
Yeah, a complete lack of urgency. And you know what? That is the ultimate in sort of luxury positions for somebody like Rishi Sunak, who's got, more money than the Queen. Of course, he can say, oh, well, let's just wait and see how things pan out, because things are going to pan out just fine for him. Do you know what I mean? But he's not in position, and not a single MP is in position to represent their own luxury, privileged beliefs. They're there to represent their constituents, and every single one of them, not just the ones who voted for them. And a lot of their constituents are, at the moment, absolutely petrified and facing down the barrel of a catastrophe. And you're right, there's no urgency around it. This cost of living crisis isn't new, and it's not something that's just suddenly smacked us all around the face, like out of the blue, and certainly not politicians. It's the result of 12 years of austerity cuts by 3 consecutive Conservative governments. And that is all those cuts to support, all those cuts to funding, all of those cuts to, their household incomes that people who are on the lowest income deciles in this country have been surviving on, have been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then all of the funding and all of the support that's in place to patch up the holes in that safety net has been stripped away. So now we're at this crisis point. More and more people are finding themselves in situations that perhaps they may not have imagined that they would ever be in, and they're realising that there's no help available. So for Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss and Boris Johnson to all be saying, oh, well, let's wait and see, is the most tone-deaf, privileged thing that they could possibly say. As you pointed out, they can commit to action about the alleged woke civil service culture, or they can make some noises about fracking a bit of time down the line. But these are just things that are playing out to their core party, to their core voters, because they want to get the votes that get them into the hot seat. They need to be taking action on this, and not just words. They need to be taking decisive and planned action to alleviate this crisis for people, because it's a catastrophe.
What sort of action, Jack? I know it's not for us to come at sort of detailed policy proposals or solutions, but what kind of action would you like to see? What sort of areas do you think they should be focusing on when it comes to helping people with living costs?
I think they need to be focusing on making sure that people have got money in their pockets to pay for their absolute fundamental essentials like food, shelter, light, heat, fuel to cook with. And I think they also need to be taking the energy companies to task. I know that Kwasi Kwarteng and Nadhim Zahawi had a meeting with the energy companies a couple of days ago, but nothing really seems to have come out of that. It was, again, gesture politics, or let's be seen to be doing something, rather than actually cracking down on them. I mean, France capped their... put an energy price cap in that was an actual energy price cap, not what our government's definition of an energy price cap seems to be, around 7%. And if they can do it, I mean, the fuel is all coming from the same places. I don't understand why ours has got to quadruple in price, whereas France's, as somebody clever on Twitter will send me all the answers at some point and say,
I'm sure, I don't doubt that, Jack. You and me both.
Why, and our pipeline's made of solid gold or something or whatever. But you know what I mean? There are solutions out there, and they do seem to be fairly simple. You know, crack down hard on the energy companies. It's absurd that they can say, "Oh well, this is the cost of the energy now. It's 4 times more than it was last year." And these are our record-breaking profits, which incidentally are 4 times more than they were last year. I mean, it's playing us all for fools. And because it's such a core need, we're all over a barrel with it. Like, there are no cheaper suppliers to go to now. There are no cheaper options, and the onus shouldn't fall on the consumer to try to, you know, live in squalor or try to shop around for some, you know, minuscule bit of small print on the internet to knock a few quid off their energy bills. This action needs to come from the top, and it's quite hard not to end up going down a whole route of conspiracy theories when you start to look at it and you go, well, why aren't the government doing anything? Does anyone in the government have shares in energy firms? Does anyone in the government actually benefit from this? And we know that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nadhim Zahawi, made his millions off the back of energy firms and oil companies. And that's the man in charge of the purse strings for the country now. So it's hard not to sit here and say, well, why aren't they taking action? Like,
I'm sure that he would say he's no longer involved.
Yeah, but you know, I used to be in the fire service, right? And I was there for about 4 years, and then I had my son and I left. I'm no longer in the fire service, but I still do volunteer stuff with them. I still support with them. I still have a connection there and a link there because I worked there for a very long time. So you can say he's no longer directly involved, but unless we've got a copy of his, you know, shares and shareholdings and everything like that, we can't, you know. And it's I'm probably going to get, you know, legal Twitter raining down on me about this, but I've just sat and looked at it from every single angle over the last few weeks, and the only thing that I can come up with as to why they're not taking action is either they benefit directly or indirectly from it, or they're incompetent, in which case they shouldn't be in charge, or they just don't care. They just don't grasp the severity of this crisis. And none of those are very good options, to be honest.
I did put that exact question when it comes to taxing energy companies to a leading supporter of Liz Truss a little earlier. We'll play that later, so stay tuned for that one. Jack, you talk about the government needing to do more to bring the energy companies into line. But what about the companies themselves? What about their behaviour? What would you say to an energy company chief exec who happened to be listening to this show this morning? What would your message to them be?
Well, I mean, I understand they're a business and businesses want to make profit, and that's what they do. But that shouldn't be their core and driving motive. They're not just a product. They're also a service, and they're a vital service. They're a service that millions of people in this country now cannot afford at the prices that they're asking. And I think it is unconscionable that they can look to make such enormous profits, and they are mind-blowing amounts of money, off the backs of people who are, you know, worried that they're going to die over the winter as a result of it. How can you justify millions and billions of pounds in bonuses and in profit margins when those millions and billions of pounds are literally paid for out of the pockets of people who are struggling to do so, struggling to put food on the table, struggling to have any quality of life? It's unconscionable, and I would ask them to sort of, you know, just not, basically.
And Jack, just finally, I just wanted to ask you, do you think that this is just a sort of one-off, a failure of current politicians, perhaps a unique set of circumstances? Of course, a lot of the inflation has been driven by the war in Ukraine. Or do you think the fact that we are talking in the way that you are about people worried about how they're going to survive this winter says something more fundamental about us as a country?
I think that this has been an avalanche waiting to happen over as I say, 12 years of Conservative-led austerity cuts means that the support services that people would have had in place and the income, paltry as it used to be, the welfare safety net, it was just paltry enough to cover the basics, and that's been stripped away. So this isn't a surprise, and I don't think it's a flash in the pan. And I think that I know that the situation in Ukraine has made things more difficult, but it's certainly not caused this crisis. And I think it's being used by some politicians as a very convenient excuse. It was first COVID and then it was Ukraine. And it's like, well, no, they also need to examine their own part in this. And that goes all the way back to 2010 and the big society and the hacking up of the welfare safety net. And I think they need, in order to take the action required that would do the right thing in this situation, they need to have some very quick, honest reflection about their part in this and stop trying to push the blame onto consumers, energy companies, COVID, Ukraine, the weather, and go, yeah, well, we stripped away all the support and now we need to put it back.
Jack, thank you. Great to speak to you this morning. Really grateful for your time. Thank you for joining us on the show.